Welcome back to BrainWaves. This is the podcast where we try to understand our minds a little bit better, the thoughts that we have and the feelings that we don't always understand, and the everyday things that affect us more than we realise. In last week's episode, I talked about overthinking, which I think is something that many of us experience. And the topic of this week's episode is quite closely linked to that. Today I want to talk about the habit of assuming the worst. And just like overthinking, I think a lot of us may do this and don't always realise we're doing it. Not necessarily over a long period of time, but those instant thoughts that just appear. Something small might happen and your mind immediately lands on a negative explanation or instantly jumps to the worst possible conclusion. You might make a small mistake, or something feels slightly off, or things didn't go exactly how you expected, and your mind will go straight to, this isn't good, something's wrong, or this is going to turn into something bigger. And it happens so quickly that it almost feels automatic, like you don't even get a say in it. And what's interesting is that we don't usually question that first thought. We just accept it. It feels true. Because in that moment, it doesn't feel like you're assuming the worst. It feels realistic. But when you actually take a step back and look at it, your mind has taken something small and turned it into something so much bigger. It's not based on what is actually happening. It's based on what your mind is trying to protect you from. I've noticed this personally. For example, when I first started my new job, I had quite a bit of time off during the first 6 months, the probation period, because of sickness and some family stuff going on. And even though those things were completely valid, my mind didn't really take any of that into account. Instead, it went straight to, I'm not going to pass my probation. And that thought felt so real. It didn't feel like a possibility. It felt like something that was already decided. I thought things like, they're going to think I'm unreliable. This is going to reflect really badly on me. And the thing is, nobody actually said anything like that. There was no clear evidence that I was failing. My mind had just filled in the gaps. And I think that's what assuming the worst often feels like. It's not always loud and dramatic. Sometimes it's just a quiet belief in the background that this isn't going to work out for me. I think a big part of it comes down to how our brains are wired. We're naturally more sensitive to things that could go wrong because historically that's what kept us safe. That's what helped us survive. And sometimes it comes from fear. Fear of things going wrong or fear of being judged. Fear of not being good enough. And your mind tries to handle that fear by preparing you for the worst outcome. It's protecting you by preparing for things to go wrong. It's like saying, if I expect it now, it won't hurt as much later. And in some ways, that makes sense. Because if you've ever been disappointed or hurt unexpectedly, your mind learns from that, and it will try to stop that from happening again. So it starts scanning for signs, analysing situations, looking for anything that might go wrong. But because your mind doesn't always know when it's needed, it applies the same level of alertness to everyday situations that aren't actually dangerous. Things like messages, conversations, small changes in behaviour. And suddenly those things feel much more serious than they actually are. So in reality, it just makes you experience that stress or worry early or unnecessarily, before anything has even happened, or for things that might not end up happening. And this is where it can become exhausting, because you're not just dealing with reality, you're dealing with a version of reality that your mind has created. And over time, this can really affect how we see things. Because if our first thought is always negative, you start to experience situations through that particular lens. And that can lead to self-doubt, anxiety, feeling on edge, or constantly second-guessing yourself. You might start to hold back from saying things or avoid certain situations or overanalyze everything you do. And even when things are going well, there's a part of your mind waiting for something to go wrong. And that can make it really hard to relax. But there is a difference between being aware of possibilities and assuming that the worst is definitely true. And something that's really important to remember is that your first thought isn't the final truth. It's just your brain's quickest response. But you don't have to stay there. There is actually a small moment between that first thought and what you choose to do next. And most of the time, we skip over that moment completely. But if you can start to notice it, even slightly, it can change how you experience things. So instead of going straight to, this isn't going to work out, you might pause and think, that's one possibility, but it's not the only one. Instead of asking, what if something goes wrong, try asking, what else could be true? That small shift then creates space. Space for other explanations. Space for things to not be as bad as your mind is suggesting. So just opening your mind to other possibilities can take some of that intensity away. Something else that can really help is asking yourself, do I actually know this for sure? Because most of the time you don't. You're filling in the gaps. And those gaps tend to get filled with the worst case scenario. But they're just assumptions, not facts. I know it's easier said than done because your thoughts can feel very convincing, but they're still just thoughts. They're not predictions, and they're not guarantees. And sometimes you can help yourself by just slowing things down. Because this pattern usually happens very quickly, so even just noticing, I'm assuming the worst right now, that can create a bit of space. And in that space, you have a choice. You can continue the spiral, or you can gently question it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Even shifting your thoughts slightly can help. Instead of, this is definitely going to go wrong, you might say, yes, this might go wrong, but it also might be okay. I think another helpful shift is allowing things to just be neutral. And this is something that has helped me personally to start to overcome my habit of constantly assuming the worst. But not everything has to mean something straight away. Sometimes it's just unclear or temporary or not fully understood yet. And that's okay. You don't have to figure it out instantly. And if you're someone who does this a lot, you are definitely not alone. It is such a common pattern. It just shows up differently for different people. And something I would really love to do with this podcast is to make it feel like a space where we can share these things openly. So if you do have any ways that help you cope with this sort of thing, or ways that you've learned to reframe negative thoughts, please do feel free to message me on Instagram. I'd genuinely love to hear them, and it might really help someone else as well. Because sometimes hearing how someone else handles something can make things feel a little bit less overwhelming. And if you can take anything away from this episode, let it be this. Your first thought isn't always the truth. It is just a starting point, and you get to decide what to do next. If you can relate to anything that I've talked about in this episode, if you maybe feel a little bit more understood or hopeful that negative thoughts can be reframed, then I'm really glad you're listening, and I hope to see you next week.